we're going to talk about the three biggest questions I have heading into the 2025 offseason for the Chicago Cubs. Number one, Jed Hoyer. We need some clarity on what Jed Hoyer is going to be.
There's a drive! Way back! It might be! It could be! It is! Holy cow! Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy!
Hey, Cub fans! Welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am your hostess, the mostest, Jeff Candid Cubs Fergalskis. And if you're joining us for the first time, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave some comments, share with your friends. If you're listening on the audio podcast, make sure you're subscribing as well. And don't forget to leave us a review to help Bricks Behind the Ivy grow. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I sound like I'm in an amazing mood, which I'm not. The Chicago Cubs have all but been eliminated at this point from the postseason. And
oh no! We suck again!
Yeah, it's just very, very frustrating. It's been a number of years since playoff baseball. We would count 2020 maybe as a playoff season, but it really isn't. It's a different season. The whole situation is weird. But another elimination. Jed Hoyer has yet to reach the promised land, or the Promised Land tournament, as the president of baseball operations. So I wanted to take some time today, instead of the box score blitz and our usual content, to have just kind of a discussion of where we are with the Cubs, what they are, and how we're going to move forward with Bricks Behind the Ivy this offseason, and how the Cubs are going to move forward moving into 2025, as this is turning into a very big offseason for a team that is trying to move away from the fringe approach and turn themselves into a perennial contender. Because, as Craig Counsell said pregame last night, we should be putting together 90-win teams and making sure we're getting into the tournament. And the distance between us and the Brewers is large.
Gotta get better, man. Like the team we're chasing is 10 games ahead of us. You gotta get better, and we should try to be building 90-win teams here. I mean, you know, like that's like what you have to do to, you know, that's a playoff standard. I mean, that's what you got to get to be safely in the playoffs, right? And safely in the tournament. So.
The following is a live reaction to that comment from yesterday.
Game. All right. On the count of three, name your favorite dinosaur. Don't even think about it. Just name it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Velociraptor.
If you were a chick, who's the one guy you would sleep with?
John Stamos.
What? Did we just become best friends?
Yup.
And that's frustrating as a Cubs fan. And it's frustrating as a Chicago fan to just be outclassed by the teams in Wisconsin. It applies to the Packers for a very, 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 I don't have any more varies in me to say, but long time. And now the Brewers have really eclipsed the Cubs and how they put together their team and how they're successful. And, you know, you have to commend, congratulations to the Milwaukee Brewers, and congrats to friend of the pod, Jake McKibben, over at the Brewer Blogs. Happy for you guys at postseason baseball. But yeah, they did it after moving Corbin Burns, with Christian Yelich being injured a large portion this year. And looking up and down that lineup, no true star besides, you know, pretty reasonably stable performance from William Contreras, who was a throw-in in a trade that they made with the Braves that ended up with them getting Sean Murphy. So the Cubs just need to do something different. Jed needs to do something different. And if the ownership group doesn't think Jed is capable of doing something different, then it might be time to give Jed his walking papers. Because what he's been doing with the budget he's been given just simply isn't good enough. And it's very frustrating, as a lot of pundits for the Cubs have said, to look at their payroll now over the luxury tax threshold, the first level of the CBT, so they will be penalized in tax dollars, with increases in season tickets coming this year by at least 3% for those who are the most loyal to the club, and putting together a roster that's about $230-some million, over $237 million, and being a slightly above 500 team. It's just not enough. It's just not enough. The expectations have changed, and I think everyone here can sit and stew in the idea of how frustrating this season has felt. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that this season feels frustrating because Theo changed the game. He changed what our expectations are. He's changed this fan base. He's changed what we expect from the Chicago Cubs. And it doesn't change that Wrigleyville is still an attractive location. It's still a great experience. It's expensive. It's become very expensive for the family of four to go to the ball game, with the second most expensive ticket in all of baseball. But it is a beautiful, beautiful ballpark. And there are some grumblings of how the neighborhood feels versus how it used to feel. But there's no denying what they've done has really taken care of a 100-year plus ballpark and moved it into the future without taking away anything from it that made it feel so special to begin with. And that's something that, every time I walk into that building, I feel like I'm 8, 10 years old again. I feel that magic. I feel that rush. I feel like, as I told Jim Christopher in the Ballpark Nation interview episode, it's like my point of origin. It's where I get my recharge. So the fact that there's not going to be more Cubs baseball in about a week makes me really sad, because it means there is a large number of days we're going to start counting down till spring training, and we have to wait till November for a World Series team to be crowned that absolutely will not be the Cubs, and wait for news. Wait for news on what this team's going to do. We're replacing the Shohei Ohtani watch this offseason with Juan Soto watch, and there's already been articles and conversation around whether or not the Cubs will actually be involved, regardless of my opinion of him being the absolute perfect player. And every team in Major League Baseball should want this guy, regardless of the cost of his contract, because he is 25 and is already writing himself into the Hall of Fame, has been reasonably healthy up to this point in his career, has an incredible batting eye, extremely high on base and slug, and just seems to care a ton about the game. And he's 25. He's 25. He fits right into this young potential timeline. And him moving in the outfield for this team, this is for another episode of my Juan Soto argument. But yeah, it doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great. And I generally try to find the positivity. I try to find the middle ground. That is what you can always kind of count on from Bricks Behind the Ivy. I'm not intending to make content that's supposed to be reactionary. I'm trying to be a fan, and the way I am as a person is I try not to immediately react to things. When I'm at a sporting event, it's different. When I'm there, like, I'm immediately frustrated or immediately excited. Like, that being part of that moment with a group of people changes that game. But I'm really reflective, and I try not to sit and say this should be done and that should be done. I'm not trying to have a bitey tweet. I am trying to have funny dad joke tweets with puns, because I think I'm very punny. And but at the end of the day, I try to take a step back and look at what the whole picture is, what's the information I have, and what's the information I don't have. And here's a really basic way of looking at the Cubs. But before we think of anything basic about the Cubs, let's think about something awesome about the Cubs. And to me, that's Wrigleyville Sports. Wrigleyville Sports has been a proud sponsor of Bricks Behind the Ivy for almost our entire first season. They hopped on early, and we're so thankful for their partnership up to this point, and are looking forward to growing that partnership in 2025. And thank you so much for everything you bring. Thank you to everyone in that store that's interacted with us, that has come on the show, that wears our gear, that has asked for gear. Just thank you so much. And as a thank you to the listeners, make sure you use that code IV10, yes, IV10 at checkout, to get 10% off your order. So maybe the Cubs season is ending, but Wrigleyville Sports, they sell Bear stuff. They have Bull stuff. They have all your Chicago teams covered. Fill your carts. Use code IV10. Get 10% off your order. And we're entering the holidays. Maybe start shopping a little bit early. Maybe get mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, your kids something that they love from a team that they love. And save a little coin, because these days everybody's always looking to save a little bit of money. So use that code IV10 today. And thank you, Wrigleyville Sports, for being just such a fantastic partner. we do have Harry Caray here to wish Ryan Sandberg a happy 65th birthday. And today's Deep Thoughts with Harry is brought to you by Yagi Road Roasting Company, a new sponsor, the Bricks Behind the Ivy. And I'm telling you, I love coffee. My wife loves coffee. And I will not be drinking other coffee anymore. The coffee is so good. They roast the beans themselves. They have great distributors that are, responsible distributors from across the world. But they started by 3 college friends of Valparaiso University. Yagi Road Roasting Company is a specialty boutique coffee roaster centered on ethically sourcing and meticulously roasting some of the most special coffees in the world. So a lot of life's most special moments happen over coffee, which is why Yagi Road ensures that the coffee in your mug is as special as the moment you are experiencing. So check out the link in the description of this podcast. Click that link, get some Yagi Road roasting, and we've got some exciting things cooking for the roasting in this case, for the 2025 season. So make sure you're clicking that link, ordering some coffee so that we can continue to grow the relationship. And thank you so much, Yagi Road Roasting Company, for being a sponsor of Bricks Behind the Ivy. And without further ado, here's Deep Thoughts with Harry Caray.
Holy cow! Hey, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to another Deep Thoughts with yours truly, Harry, down here at the old Wrigley Fire Bar and Grill, drowning my sorrows over this 2024 season of the Chicago Cubs. Boy, oh boy, we're not winning the games that we need to, We lost a series to Oakland. Oakland, for God's sake. I mean, they barely draw anybody to the ballpark, and they haven't been famous since Moneyball. Boy, oh boy. And then Colorado ends up beating us too. Come on, KB, can't you tell them we need a little mojo to get going with this? But I don't know. There is some positives that I've seen so far. I mean, Michael Busch has just been tearing it up lately, and I saw Ian Happ the other night do a boom shakalaka on a 103-mile-an-hour pitch off that Mason Miller guy. Boy, oh boy, he got all of that one. I tell you what, I got some other stats from whoever the hell's left in the booth. Hell, I don't know. And Suzuki, he's adjusting to his DH role a little bit. He better, because, boy, I've seen that guy try to catch a fly ball. It's kind of like watching Vanaken walk out of a bar on Rush Street at 3 a.m. Boy, oh boy. But hey, tip of the cap, Justin Steele is back, and he's going to try to get a little bit of action in before the season's over. Maybe this is your good things coming next year. And as always, Shota Konnichiwa Minaga had a career-high 11 Ks the other night against Oakland. Shota, as always, this Bruce Brianna. Ooh, that's good. But we got to look at the negatives here, folks. I don't want to be negative Nancy or nothing, but, we're winning games, but we're not winning the ones that we need to, and we've got, our hitting is coming around, but it's not timely enough. And don't even get me started on the damn bullpen. Boy, oh boy, every time, you think we're going to take a ball game, and then they come in and flush the old toilet and blow another one. Oh, goodness gracious, every once in a while I got to give myself a little jump start in the ticker, because I'm getting about tired of this. Hopefully we fix that problem in the offseason. But Cub fan, I got to quit feeling a little part. Excuse me for a moment. Ooh. Cub fans, I got a question for you this week. Do you think that Cody Bellinger is going to re-sign next year, opting out? Comment in the little below thingy. I don't know. Jeff's trying to teach me this social media thing. Our social media was you open the door and you go, "Hey, who wants a beer?" But hey, comment below. What do you think about Cody if he's going to opt out? But Cub fan, we still got 10 more to go. The fat lady hasn't started singing yet, so we're going to keep hope alive. Have a sip of a cola. Oh boy. But hey, Cub fans keep coming out there to the ballpark. And from all of us here at Wrigley Fire Bar and Grill, shooting it back to Jeff. So long, everybody. Holy cow.
And we're going to talk about the three biggest questions I have heading into the 2025 offseason for the Chicago Cubs. Number one, Jed Hoyer. We need some clarity on what Jed Hoyer is going to be. I think the answer is likely that he will play out the rest of his contract. I'm not sure that's the answer the fan base is looking for. I personally am not super frustrated with Jed Hoyer. I can point to his mistakes, but on the other side of that coin, I do see a farm system that he built and dodging the bullets of some of the 2016 team players and not signing any of those players to extensions and getting pretty solid return for some of those guys as their contracts expired with the team. There's some mistakes. There's some guys I wish stayed. I wish Anthony Rizzo had stayed in Chicago. I felt like he fit the bill at first base. And we talked about last week how hard it was to replace his production prior to Michael Busch over at first. And we took for granted how great his glove was and how he lifted up the infield defense of this team for a number of years just by his ability to cover that position. It's a position that when you see someone terrible playing first base, you really, really can see it. When you see someone who's good at first base, you don't really notice it. It's not something that you necessarily appreciate, but Anthony Rizzo and the way that he charged bunts, the tarp catches, he was a great defender. But Jed did a great job not getting tied down by the contracts that those players were expecting. And it's not that I've wished bad things on Chris Bryant as he has struggled to stay healthy since he left Chicago. I didn't think Javier Baez would become what he is now. I didn't think his plate discipline would disintegrate to the level that it has now. But the Cubs are not locked under those contracts. That's not the issue. The issue is the deployment of the resources they have and the waste of money and space on this roster, like giving a 2-year deal to Trey Mancini last year, Drew Smyly at the time signing him as rotation depth and giving him a 3-year deal that has turned into him being a not really usable lefty specialist out of the pen. And Kyle Hendricks, I think his contract was fine for what he was. I just did not see a lot of how this season was happening. And he has looked at times fine and other times not. And he has a decision to make going into the 2025 season that he has insinuated at this point that he'd really like to pitch. I would be heartbroken if he pitches in a different uniform, but he's a player that I will root for the entirety of his career. But I really would like to see him retire a Cub, even though I could admit, putting the fandom aside, that if, depending on the price and the type of market he has, that's not a guy I necessarily want penciling in to the 2025 Cubs rotation. I hope that we aim higher than that. Which brings us back to the original point, Jed Hoyer. What should the Cubs do with him? What do you guys think? Should he be fired almost immediately? If he does that slow down our offseason in trying to figure out, like, we will have the playoffs and to interview people and hopefully have someone in place by the time the offseason starts in November? But should Jed Hoyer go, even if he's on the last year of his contract? Even though he's built this farm system, is it time to find a different voice at the head of baseball? The other question I have specifically, and it's tied to Jed Hoyer, is number 2, the biggest question going into this offseason is who's driving the car? And what I mean by that, and Jed Hoyer is not acting alone. Jed Hoyer doesn't make decisions in a vacuum. And this very much reminds me of the David Ross situation last year. David Ross ended up being a scapegoat and lost his job because of the availability of Craig Counsell. Craig Counsell is now here, and I think Craig Counsell has done a pretty solid job with the resources he's been handed. I would say that one of the biggest gripes I have with his 2025 season is riding Hector Neris. But if you're going to take a veteran and put him in that role and hope he really establishes himself over some of the options the Cubs did have in that situation, And once Porter Hodge really worked himself as a young guy, as being the guy for that situation, that's when they moved on. They got rid of Hector Neris, and he's ironically back in Houston. But he didn't sign on to be on this team's closer. So it's a little bit of a failure of Jed to walk into this season assuming Adbert Alzolay would be a shutdown closer, or that, given his injury history, that he'd be healthy. And we kind of made the same assumptions too with Merriweather as well. He has not put together many healthy seasons, and this was a lost season for him. And now he requires surgery in the offseason. So it'll be interesting to see. You should not depend on his production in 2025 either. But is Jed making these decisions under a budget handed down by Ricketts, which, if $237 million based on looking around the division, should be plenty of money to build a contending baseball team? It really should. But is the reasons he's behaved the way he has dictated by the guidance of the ownership, or are the reasons he's behaving the way he has guided by the Jed Hoyer thought process? And I think the answer to that question will tie directly to the reaction to question number one of what should be done with Jed Hoyer. If the directives are coming from the ownership group, then Jed Hoyer is likely to stay because he's doing what he's been told to do within the budget and the actions he's been allowed to do it. And I think that there has been a shift in the last 2 years in how they behaved in deploying more money to try to put together a winning team while they were building this farm system. And that's why it feels like the assets and such have been dispersed poorly, because it was a very dramatic shift in how they were going to add players to this budget. And you got Dansby Swanson, you got Trey Mancini, you got these players that you're trying to fit into a puzzle while you're working on this other objective. And it's that thread the needle process that is extremely difficult. But in that time, they didn't want to overscale their budget to these long-term contracts, because I feel like there's this lack of clarity on the safety or the intentions maybe of the ownership group of how much they're going to commit to player payroll. So I really would like to see if there's more tea leaves this offseason on who's driving the car. One thing that's really interesting that I think about the 2024 offseason was when Crane Kenny and all those folks came on the radio after the season and said, Jed's going to have plenty of money to spend. Jed's going to have plenty of money to spend. The CBT is something that we don't use as a hard cap, and when necessary or appropriate, we'll go over it. There was all the sound bites talking about what the Cubs would do financially. And then as the Shohei stuff kind of got murky and the Cubs' involvement, we really don't know. We really don't have the answers. We can point to them and say the Ricketts are cheap, or we can say Jed is cheap, he won't sign these contracts. We have no idea how involved they were in Yamamoto and Shohei Ohtani. And Shohei Ohtani was never coming to the Cubs. He was never interested in leaving the West Coast. So at the end of the day, we really don't know what Jed would have done in those situations. And maybe the conversations early in the offseason when they were talking about the money the Cubs were going to spend were tied to the idea of them being able to lure Shohei Ohtani. And at that point, just blow the budget out of the roof if you're going to spend X amount of dollars on that player. Like, we don't know if he was going to try to get cute with a shorter, higher AAV deal, or if he was going to kowtow to what Shohei Ohtani's expectations were. We truly don't know. So I'm looking for similar type tea leaves in the next few weeks. We saw Craig Counsell's pretty candid reaction prior to the game last night and his expectations. And that brings us to question number 3. How integral is Craig Counsell in the process of building this team and front office? When they hired Craig Counsell, in thinking about the Brewers, in this moment, we can look at the Brewers with Pat Murphy and say, yeah, they are lapping the Cubs in the same race. I'm not going to deny that. I had them at the beginning of the year as taking a huge step back because I gave a ton of credit to what Craig Counsell has brought. But I think similar to economic policy or policies within like large organizations, if you take an integral piece out of there, the immediate downfall, the immediate disintegration of game planning, talent evaluation, All those things are just not going to happen in a single year. I saw like the ice cold takes torching Danny Perkins for his take on the Chicago Cubs this year, and him lashing out at a fan saying that Craig Counsell will ultimately be more successful in Chicago than the Brewers will be successful during his run. And I think he has a valid point. And the reason I am agreeing with Danny Perkins in this unique perspective that is now a freezing cold take is Craig Counsell has worked. He started in the front office of the Brewers. He started in player evaluation. He moved his way up towards an assistant GM role. Ultimately, became manager. He is the ideal executive or player manager for a modern baseball organization because he has touched all parts. And we read articles last year in The Athletic, and we read some from Jesse Rogers and ESPN about how he was in everybody's ear and he was calling Jed all the time and bringing up these different ideas. And Craig saying yesterday that, there's players and things that he wants to pursue, and they asked if he could give him some ideas, and he's like, he's not going to tell, which there's no value in him running his mouth about the different things he wants to be involved in. But I think Craig Counsell was brought in here as a theoretical third GM or theoretical second president of baseball operations, and he brings such a impactful voice and a balance of experience from so many different chairs that I think it might take time, as I did look at this season as we're going to install Craig Counsell in this organization, and he's going to get his hands on analytics. He's going to get to meet these players. He's going to get to meet these prospects, and he's going to have an idea of how the Cubs' identity or a team can be built and the strengths and the weaknesses of this organization, and it's going to take time to re-implement that. Maybe that's too optimistic. You can blast me in the comment below if you think this is too optimistic of a take. But Craig's been here a year. He's going to be an active part of this discussion. We're likely going to hear about his active part of the discussion, very similarly to how we heard Dansby Swanson wanted to be an integral part of the discussions during the offseason. There are voices here to combat either ownership, if they're involved, which they do take, from what we understand, a hands-off with free agency, much to the chagrin of Scott Boras. But these players and Craig Counsell do have an opinion, and they're going to voice it. And Craig Counsell took this job, I'm assuming, he's coming to an organization that has more resources regularly than the organization that he left. And he is very, very good at what he does. And Jed Hoyer brought in him to be a dissenting opinion on how they were building their farm system because they built it a certain way. And then the vision got narrow. They emptied the cupboard and they did not advance like other groups. You hear from players now that the Dodgers on pitching infrastructure just do stuff better than everyone else. Players that go there just say that. And there's a lot of players, especially like Michael Kopech, that saying, they told me to throw my fastball less. I'm hoping for Sox fans' case that he just had grown tired of hearing or the way they were presenting the information to the White Sox or from the White Sox, because it just felt very obvious that that's what the change needed to be, because he was really using his fastball. So maybe that's not the Dodgers, but the players verbalizing that there are people out in front of them and giving them their analytics, and it's just different. It just feels different than what other teams are doing is meaningful. It's meaningful when they say these things because players talk. And I'm hoping that Craig Counsell is an integral part of whatever happens this offseason, because I expect that his opinion in this moment is much more valuable than some of the voices inside the organization. What do you think? What do you think the big keys to 2025 are going to be? What do you think the big questions as we head into the 2025 offseason are going to be? I think next week we're going to have a service in remembrance of the 2024 Cubs and talk about the highs and lows and our hopes for the offseason. I'll have Pete Erickson back on to sit and talk with me as well. And in the coming weeks and next week, we'll talk about what the Bricks Behind the Ivy offseason is going to look like, including an exciting and potential change of format coming for the offseason and moving forward into 2025. So this has been another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you like, subscribe, review, come comment on the YouTube videos. We love interactions. We're trying to build a Cubs community, which more details on that going forward. Thank you so much to Yagi Road Roasting Company and Wrigleyville Sports for being such incredible sponsors as we close season 1 of Bricks Behind the Ivy and have our eyes to season 2. Thanks so much, and for the last few days of our beautiful, beloved baseball game, go Cubs. See you guys next week.